everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Patti's People, a deep dive with experts from around the world in matters relating to HEOR, real-world evidence, and market access. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Chris Hendriksz, the Chief Community Impact Officer of a rare cause. Dr. Hendriksz is a distinguished physician who is focused on rare diseases, particularly in the metabolic and genetic disorder arena. He has extensive experience in clinical care, research, and patient advocacy, and he's made significant contributions to the understanding and treatment of rare conditions, particularly focused on improving the quality of life and access for these patients. He's known for his compassionate approach and his innovative methods, and he's highly regarded in the medical community for his dedication to this arena. He frequently collaborates internationally and provides insight and leadership to further research and awareness in the field. We're going to dig into some of the challenges that he has encountered working on the continent of Africa and advancing rare disease awareness, access, and management. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Patti. Always when I hear this, I wonder who's this person, but thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I would love to share with the people just what have we learned and what can we do better and where do we go from here?
Marvelous. Well, let's get started then. So, Chris, you've had a career that has taken you from the direction of a physician that is treating metabolic diseases to founding the largest rare disease center in the UK, combined with a personal family experience of a rare disease with your own son. And you had some humble beginnings in South Africa, where you had parents that taught you a really important lesson that you said has followed you throughout your career, which is to be a fixer of problems. Today, you run a rare cause. Tell me a little bit about the mission of a rare cause and the problems you're trying to solve.
Yes, thank you for that question. And it's a really interesting concept because a rare cause is our non-profit foundation, and it's been set up really to build on the work that we've previously done. So previously, I've worked and trained multiple doctors in more than 50 countries and connected them in multiple networks. And we realized that now that people has got the knowledge, the next step would be, how do you apply the knowledge? And because when I go to meetings, I always find that Africa seems to be the missing continent, and my roots are in Africa, we focused our work primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, where we see the need is the greatest. So we've got these trained clinicians. We managed to train some laboratory people as well. And what is now important is how do we apply this knowledge and how do we build from the work for a rare cause? And what a rare cause focuses on is actually sharing knowledge and expertise, because time is the thing really lacking for a lot of people. And it's people that has got funding usually, but nobody's actually got the time to spend to get things moving from the beginning and be willing to slowly slog away. And this is what a rare cause is really doing. It's really starting from the knowledge base, slowly building on more and more knowledge, and then empowering people with that knowledge to start train the trainer, the next generation.
What are some of the lessons that you can share with our audience about your continental strategy around patient access? Can you reflect on what can and cannot be translated to the continent of Africa? And what are some of the differences that those of us that haven't worked there should be aware of if we're based in Europe or the US?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's some real big differences. And I think the biggest challenge is that our cultures are very different. And I think that's where some of the problems comes with people trying to work in the African continent. I think I don't want to go through all of it, but I think in brief, we are looking at an individualistic, more democratic society in the Western world, whereas Africa is community-based, family-based, much more traditional values, and where culture, spirituality plays a much, much bigger role. than what it does in other parts of the world. And for them, this is part of their healthcare. And we need to be really knowing and learning about how much does that feature in the way that they see life, and also how much that it actually involves their perception of healthcare. I think there's also been, as we all know, quite a few episodes where people felt they've been badly treated just because their values are different. So I think the main thing is a lot of times people are intending to do the right thing in the African subcontinent. The problem is the impacts are not always frequently understood. And here I think I'll be African. We like to be storytelling and exposing a little bit more in the way we do things. So one of the things that I would want to share with you is that when you start looking at building anything new in Africa, we tend to want to say, we've got the knowledge, we've got the facilities, please give us your patients and your samples, we'll fix your problem. Mm-hmm. And that is the natural way that we solve things. Whereas in the African culture, that is not really the way you do things. Because what they would be expecting is, how do you train me to solve the problem myself? Because I know in the future, you may not be there, and I need to stand on my own feet. So it's this cultural difference, which I think is really important to just remember when people are engaging in people in the sub-Saharan continent.
So let's get really nitty-gritty on this. Give me an example of what might be a traditional way or a common way with a real disease, with a real patient-oriented program. The common way and the better way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will be biased. Yeah, I'll pick one of the conditions for which we can actually test, because I think it's a good example. Mm-hmm. It brings many issues out as well. So let's assume we have a patient with a rare disease, and I'll pick here Gaucher disease just because it's one of the commonest rare diseases we find. This is a disease which traditionally we diagnose and we know quite a lot about. There are expensive treatments for this condition. And the natural inclination we would have is, when we suspect there's a patient with Gaucher disease in Africa, is we would say to the doctor of the family, just send us the samples. We will do the test for you. Once we've done the test for you, we will quickly give you access to our charitable access program, and we'll send you the expensive treatment and you could treat your patient. That's a really good way of doing it. However, in the African context, that is not the appropriate way of doing that, because firstly, they suspect the patient has got this condition, but now it needs to be tested. So ideally, the sample needs to be tested inside the continent. They've kind of agreed that we're similar in continent at least. So the first thing would be, it needs to be done in the continent. What happens next is that due to the geography and different diets and many other things, what we call modifier genes, the disease process may be very different in this patient, firstly, than what it is in our known history. We then would offer the family and say, listen, not here is our charitable access program, but to say, listen, there are a multitude of options here. One of them is you can join our charitable access program. But this actually involves a treatment which needs to be infused in a hospital, which means you will have to travel to a hospital on a regular basis to get it. This is a lifelong treatment. Mm-hmm. Compared to but there are other options. Now, one of the other options we can do is we can offer you potentially to go for a condition which is a bone marrow transplant. Now, this has got a lot of mortality. You may not survive it, but at least it may be a once-off treatment, but you're going to need a lot of support. Mm-hmm. The other alternative is really, we just need to treat your symptoms. And actually, there are things we can do to make your pain better. We can make your quality of life better, but we don't really change the progression of your disease. And this is really important in this example that I've called, because a lot of the Gaucher disease patients in Africa actually have brain disease, which means they're going to die at a much younger age than the patients we see in other parts of the world. So actually giving them the option to have better quality of life, less intervention, should not be taken away from them. And that's what I say. We are the ultimate fixers, but actually we need to be the ultimate solution providers as well.
So options are one of the key tenets of how you approach patients?
Absolutely. And involving the family, because again, I can give you a very example of a patient we had. Similar to this, we made the rare disease diagnosis. We found a charitable access program. We put him on treatment. And then one day the patient came to clinic in tears and he said, I can't do this anymore. And we said to him, but what is the problem? He said, I've lost my job. And I said, why? He said, well, it takes me 2 days to come to the hospital and it takes me 2 days to come back. And I'm 1 day in the hospital. So 5 days of the week, I'm getting my treatment. Now I can no longer care for my family. So your treatment is not good for me. And those are the kind of blind spots we have.
Yeah.
We don't appreciate the differences in a well-connected world to a less well-connected world.
This seems to be a particularly challenging ethical dilemma that you might encounter as you address some of these rare diseases. Talk to me a little bit about some of these sticky ethical issues that you grapple with fairly often, and how are they unique to Africa, but that we could use those learnings from a worldwide approach.
Oh, absolutely. The ethical issues are multitude, and it just depends at which entry point you really want to start. I will most probably just start on the kind of the edge of basically genetics, where it is. And then generally, in Africa, people see genetics as something foreign. They have a traditional belief system that disease is passed along from family to family because of bad previous actions. That is in the cultural belief system. Now, as people are getting more educated and more westernized, you get a split. So you might find that the grandparents has got this perception, the next generation is much more westernized, and now they've got a child with a rare disease, which is potentially genetic. And we want to do genetic testing and prove to them that actually it's no fault of their own. This is something which happens randomly, and that is the best way to deal it. And then we can offer them again options. One of the options would be actually that we could offer genetic counseling. And the challenge here is that people would sometimes say, but are we trying to have a modern form of eugenics, in the sense that we want to just get rid of all the patients which has got a rare disease because they are complex and they cost a lot of money towards the healthcare system. But that is not a valid argument, because what we tend to say to people is, firstly, you ultimately need to look at quality of life and also at budget impact. So generally what you find with rare diseases, the budget impacts are relatively small compared to the individual cost per patient. So these are the things which comes up, and these are the things which we use. So it's basically around cost, genetics, how do we perceive that, and to encourage our families and patients to learn more about genetics and to understand that genetic prenatal testing or carrier testing are things which are additional tools. You may want to have 4 children with the same disease, but you may also want the knowledge that you don't want those. And those are the things which we need to teach them and try and prevent it. So that is a way in which I think we give people more options. The difference is that in Western world of modern medicine, we give the patient the options and then we say to him, what do you want? And in Africa, once you've given them the options, the patient would turn around and say, doctor, you know best, you tell me. And really, this is a dilemma, because you really need to try and put yourself in that family situation, which is never truly possible, but you have to try as best as possible to give the most concrete and best example and the best advice for them in their particular situation. And there you need to lean on other people. You need to speak to the rest of the family. You need to speak to the patient organization. You need to get all the inputs, really, that you make sure you give the right advice for the specific family.
Do you work much with the the regulatory authorities? Are the political leaders? And what kinds of issues are coming up at that level?
Yeah, so we're happy to engage with everybody at every level. And one of our surveys we did is that our politicians are the least informed about rare diseases. Now, we don't know if that is just convenient, which we suspect not. We think it's just there are so many conflicting things to deal with that these are the least of their problems. And we really live in a democratic society. So the problems of the majority is the fixture of governments, policymakers, and everything. And the minority doesn't really come up. And when you are in a country like Sub-Saharan Africa, poverty, food shortage, infectious disease, all of those issues are much more important to politicians and policymakers because they live in a 3-year cycle and they need to be re-elected in 3 to 4 years again. So long-term vision is not important. And what we need to engage with them, start sharing with them that actually investing in rare diseases is worthwhile for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
I frequently say to people that in rare diseases, we do a lot of what we call moonshot. And frequently, we miss the moon completely, but we end up on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And then we need to see how do we manage this. But there are some fantastic learnings, and we shouldn't forget that. And that's the arguments I have when I talk to payers. Regulators is a different group of people. I think it's really important that regulatory rules does not disproportionately affect those in low and middle income countries.
Mm-hmm.
I find it fascinating that there are rules to protect the pricing of drugs in low and middle income countries, which will only benefit those in high income countries.
Mm-hmm.
Those regulatory barriers should not be there. And we need to find the solutions to actually change it, that this is not an issue anymore. An example of that is many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa has got single exit price, which means there's no discounting or anything like that. But why do we have that? Whereas in the rest of the world, nobody's paying their fair share and everybody's taking the discount. So we need to get more, as we would say, savvy around that and use that to our benefit.
So let's just take this head on then, the drug pricing for rare diseases. You engage with the pharma industry, NGOs, the politicians, government policymakers and such. What are some of the ideas that are floating around your mind of how we can price rare disease treatments for better access?
Oh, absolutely. I think the first thing that is important, the first point I always make is that not all rare disease is expensive. That's the most important thing. There are rare diseases which can be treated for a few dollars a year. So we shouldn't exclude those. And these are by just minor dietary arrangements that can be made. So that's the first thing. The next thing which is really important is to have an innovative approach. Now, and that would be my call to people listening to this as well. There's been some very good studies done on the disproportionate price of drugs per capita in high-income countries. Because the USA is happy to burden high-cost drugs, they pay a fair share of the drug industry and the pharma industry. Other people cut price behind the scenes and actually contribute less proportional to capita. And I think that is something. So I think pharma would be doing better by linking price to GDP per capita. But that will also help us in rare diseases. And nobody's actually done that study to look at rare disease at the cost of drug per capita. Is that disproportionate in low and middle income countries? Because everybody focuses on the same countries every time and never on those which are important. So I would encourage people to look at drug pricing per capita and link it, and then specifically look at the rare disease drug. We know in general, rare disease drugs are about 4 to 5% higher per capita price, no matter where in the world you go. Now, you can say rarity brings that, it's acceptable for the input. But if everybody pays their fair share, we could most probably develop a lot more drugs. And I think that's an opportunity for pharma. So they shouldn't see my call for pricing per capita as a burden. They should see it as an opportunity to fair distribution of price and expanding it. So that's just one of the ideas I had of changing how do we fund it. The next thing, look at policymakers. Depending on where you are, due to poor diagnostics, in low and middle income countries, rare diseases make up about 2% of the population. In high income countries, about 6%, depending on how you count them. When I look at allocations of budgets, you still find, even in high income countries, you have about 2% of your budget allocation goes to rare diseases, but everybody shouts about the cost of rare diseases, but it's disproportionately allocated. And it's even worse in low and middle income countries. So when I engage with policymakers in low and middle income countries, I say to them, you've got poor diagnostics. Why don't you agree to give us, and I won't go into the maths, 1.7% of your total healthcare budget, and ask the rare disease groups to manage that, to run the rare disease service, because that would be appropriate and fair to the rest of the budget as well.
I've heard you also mention a subscription model for rare diseases. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit, I'm looking at what's happening in business all around me. And I think we can all remember the days when you used to buy a software program and you used to use it for 10 years and then you buy the upgrade, which is 5 years later or whatever, because it's cut price. But we can see that all of them has moved to subscription models. You can hardly now have anything. Even the platforms we use, they're all on subscription models. So that gives to me the insight that a subscription model is the best way to continuously generate income. So I think we need to look at a subscription model for rare disease. My thought was like this. Things like gene therapies are incredibly expensive. So affording it upfront would be very hard to justify when you say this is 4 million, 5 million, whatever the number is for a single patient. But if we look at a subscription model and we go to, and it would also push people to be firstly fair and push integrity back into medicine as well, is to say, okay, what is the prevalence of this condition? How many will be diagnosed? How many will actually meet the inclusion criteria for your treatment? And on those numbers, let's say you are entitled to X number of patients is going to be treated. Now you claim you're going to increase life expectancy by 10 years. So this is the current life expectancy. Push it on 10 years and we do the maths for the algorithm. And this is the subscription price you pay now. And once you pay this price, you can treat as many of your patients with this gene therapy as you like, because it is what you deserve. But then, because we know politicians work in cycles, we'll have a review every 3 to 5 years and then look at, did you meet those goals? Are the patients surviving? How many are dying? Are you really actually bringing the benefit you claim from your clinical trials, or do we need to adjust our subscription model? And that's just, it needs a lot of thought, it needs a lot of work, but I just think it's something that people with a background knowledge, maybe people listening to this, could look into. I think there is a real opportunity to look at this a way of funding expensive therapies in the future. And then once you've got the model, you can just link it to GDP, and again, you solve the enormous impact on different budgets.
Christian, do you work with registries or other sorts of observational research in your work?
Oh, absolutely. So very recently, actually, I've been approached by the group in Sri Lanka, the doctors group. And what they have is that in Sri Lanka, they don't have any healthcare records. Patients keep their healthcare records mostly as pieces of paper. And if they lose them, it's gone. And what I'm working on is I'm working on a program at the moment which uses a federated AI approach. So the concept of this is that basically there is a single language, and this language is like, I tend to say to people, it's like Google Translate. A patient will be able to bring their hard copies, which can be scanned, or if they're on a digital device healthcare application, you will be able to bring this into the registry You put it into a single language, and then those languages can help you to extract different sets of data. Now, these sets of data may be very different. So, as a clinician, I may have my hard clinical outcome measures I would want to have in my registry. I want to know what is happening and things. I would also want to have some quality of life data. But the patient may want to report things which are important to them in their life, and we don't see that. And if we get that to be integrated into our registries, and you have an AI algorithm running, you will be able to start picking out word clouds which stands out. And it will take too much time to talk to you, but we've actually done that, and we've actually found a word which is important to a family and changed a outcome measure because of that. But that allows you really to put that in, but it also allows us to then use the AI language so the data never leaves the patient. So it allows you to transport data across multiple areas without breaching the confidentiality. And that's been one of the big things. The registries being on different platforms, unable to communicate, and all the data protection laws. And we think we've actually got the tool at the moment, and we're going to run a pilot project in Sri Lanka. We're building at the moment, and the project will start running in February next year. So hopefully in a year's time, we can talk about how well does it integrate and how useful is it bringing this in. And then you have to have a moonshot. So the moonshot is, can we connect this to lifestyle devices as well? Will it be able to pick up the patient's iWatch, Google Watch, and tell me, how are they sleeping? What is happening to their heart rate? What is their social interaction? Can we start building all of those things in so we can get a better sense of what value means?
What are some of the differences in how the patients you work with describe value compared to how we traditionally speak about it in first world countries?
Oh, absolutely. I think when you say value, we're immediately evidence-based medicine, impact economical, we go down the things which are all the traditional. From the African patients, the patients I work with, for them its value is, how does it influence my family? Not how does it influence me? How does it influence my family? Does my condition prevent my father or mother progressing their career? Does my condition influence my siblings? Does it have an impact on them? Does it impact our whole community? Is my treatment, which is expensive, taking away from other people in the community what they deserve? And actually, you would frequently have a discussion with a patient about an expensive treatment, where the patient would turn around and say to you, "The doctor, I'm 40 years old. I've had a good life. I don't want it. Give it to someone else," which is the very non-traditional. But for them, the value is for society, the family, and it's the greater good of society, rather than what does it mean for me. And I think that's the biggest difference. The focus is on community and not on them.
Yeah. I know that you put some thought into some learnings that you have derived over working in rare diseases over several continents. Give me, let's say, the top 5 learnings.
Oh my goodness. Well, the first thing is, nothing starts without hope. You really have to create hope to get anything kicked off. Importantly, so even if it's a patient or a doctor or anything, things are going to get better. So you've got to kick it all off with hope. The next thing that I think is really important is, we've touched on, is really the thing of value. Your value is not my value. And it's something which I call the currency illusion. We kind of think that $6 is the number I frequently quote for you is the same as $6 for me. But it's not. $6 for you is, at the moment in the US, I think half a Big Mac. $6 for me is I can feed 12 people in a family. So those things are really important to get that in. The other thing is that, and we all know that education is just so important. And I love the quote which somebody else has made that said, education changes, a mirror into a window. We change from being focused on ourselves to looking out. And it's really important to get the focus out to looking at it. And that runs into the next learning, that cultural sensitivity and spirituality is incredibly important for these people. Make it part of their healthcare and accept it. Don't try and convince them if they say, we believe this is the right thing we've spoken through. As long as they've got the information, do not force them out of their ways. There are roles for all of us, and don't do that. And I would leave the last one, I think it's the fifth one, is just to say, short lives matter. So don't think because somebody's got a rare disease and they're only going to live for 20 odd years. That's not important. The amount of impact some of the rare disease patients have had on my life and other people's lives for their short lives is unmeasurable. We should never forget that.
What do you wish that stakeholders that are watching this, what do you wish that they would take away from our conversation today?
I would wish they would take away that there's so much they can do. The fact is they just don't know usually, and they're not always aware of some of the unintended consequences. So reach out, speak to us. We're happy to connect. One of the other things that I worked very hard on is to get rid of academic silos, where people work in, this is my little project and we want to just do this. Let's work together. I'm not a health economist. I don't have the regulatory knowledge. There are so much knowledge out there which you can bring in and help us things which are fairer. And the one thing is, in our work, there are no problems. There are just opportunities. So don't be scared in bringing the opportunities. And one of the things that I frequently get is, and I just want to put it out there, is people say to me, but you've got this huge amount of corruption, and that's why we don't want to engage. And then I say to them, listen, guys, this is across the world. Others are just smarter. So don't give that argument to me. Let's find the solution.
You mentioned unintended consequences. Give me an example of a project that you've either observed or been involved in where there were some unintended consequences, and how can that be a lesson?
Absolutely. And I think here I would most probably looking at some of the problems we've created with diagnosing patients. So we've created a lot of diagnostics services, and we've managed to create patients who now has got a diagnosis. We've also educated the patient organizations, and now people are suddenly crying for the Western value. They now want that expensive treatment, and they want it tomorrow, because it's the younger generation which is coming up and who does not want to deal with this. And we usually have our storytelling. And this is where I sit down with the family and I say to them, listen, guys, you know what? I would really love to drive a Ferrari. But you know what? I drive a Ford Escort. And the reason for that is I can't afford it. So put yourself in the situation you're in. Yes, we've diagnosed you with a rare disease, but actually we cannot afford the Ferrari, but we can afford the Ford Escort. We're not going to keep you walking forever. So what else can we do? These are the supportive treatment we can put in place. This is the connections we can bring. We can connect you to other families. They can share with you what are the practical things that help. How do you get a child with very stiff limbs into a car? There are so many practical, simple things that people can share. And that is where also we've kind of shifted our perception of treatment to expensive drug. And if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, it actually says treatment is the prevention, amelioration, supporting, and changing disease course. It's not only changing disease course. And I think as doctors, we need to go back to true medicine, where actually it's an art and it's not just a pure science.
So what I heard you say is that as a research project, don't go in with a predominant intervention as this drug or nothing at all, that you need to come in with multiple options that support the confluence of disease problems. Would that be, did I hit that on the nose or not?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I would bring in a new concept for you as well, which I call, you may have heard it in a different context, which I call patient washing. We've become so focused on this thing where we say we need patient-reported incomes and we need patient insights. But what we start seeing to happen is that many of the drug companies get connected to a patient organization, speak to one person who shares their views, and then present this to regulators and everybody else as this is the patient view. This is what they want, which is very far from what it is on the ground. Mm-hmm. So get their views on the ground. Be brave. I don't say don't listen to them, but test what they say. And there are multiple new tools that you can do it. But it's really important that we don't get into a way that we make this, oh, we're so happy we've got patient engagement. And even the regulators, it drives me around the bend. They ask for PROs and patient engagement. And then when you put it in and you make it a primary endpoint in a clinical trial, they're asking you, what are you trying to do? And I said, well, you've been saying patient input is the most important. But the moment I make it a primary endpoint, you say, no, we don't want it there. Can you maybe put it in the exploratory? So I think we need to get alignment, regulatory as well. What is important and what is acceptable? And we need to start building on that.
Christian, let's go to our lightning round. This is always one of my favorite sections. So if you can't answer it with just a few words, what problem keeps you up at night?
That nobody cares about the lack of diagnostics in low and middle income countries.
Yeah. What's your greatest wish?
My greatest wish is that the small tasks that I'm doing will be little snowflakes, which will become a snowball, and that the avalanche will come in years and change it for rare disease patients.
Let us know. What's your greatest fear?
My greatest fear is we'll have the same interview in 10 years' time and still talking that what do we need to do? What do we need to change? We need a lot more doers and a lot less talkers.
Well, I think I know what your legacy will be, is that you have dropped some snowflakes on the sub-Saharan part of Africa to help those of us that don't live and work there understand how better we can work with this group of individuals for a better outcome and a better health. I really appreciate your time. Do you have any parting words?
No, only that is the most perfect example to leave you. Sub-Saharan is a desert, and I'm talking about snow. They are worlds apart, but it can be done. So let it snow in the desert.
All right. Thank you. This was really delightful. And because I spent some time there, this interview was really important to me. It was important to hear your words and to take some learnings from your tremendous on the ground experience that you have there. And I truly hope that you get a lot of phone calls from people that watch this and ask for your help and insight.
Me too, absolutely. And I hope, and there is so much we can do together. And I think that's the main thing. Share your problems. We may have the solutions for them. I'm sure you've seen the African solution for having a Tesla is you just need a trailer with a generator.